The late autumn wind whispered through the tall prairie grass, carrying with it the familiar scent of sage and dust that Jake Thompson had known since childhood. At 43, his weathered face bore the marks of a life spent under the merciless Texas sun, each line etched deeper by the loss of his beloved wife Sarah 3 years prior. Their ranch, 20 miles outside of Fort Worth, had been his anchor through the grief, a legacy built by calloused hands and stubborn determination. That crisp October morning started like any other, with Jake checking the fence line that bordered Comanche territory. The treaty boundaries were more suggestion than law out here, where the railroad company's surveyors pushed ever westward with their measuring chains and transit levels. He'd watched their steady advance with growing unease, knowing the delicate peace between settlers and natives grew more fragile with each passing day. The sound of his horse's hooves was muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves as he rode through a stand of cottonwoods. Something caught his eye: fresh bear tracks, massive ones, pressed deep into the soft earth. Jake had seen enough prints to know this was no ordinary black bear, but one of the giant grizzlies that occasionally wandered down from the northern territories. He was about to turn back when a blood-curdling scream split the morning stillness. Without hesitation, Jake spurred his horse toward the sound, drawing his Winchester from its scabbard as he rode. The screams grew louder, mixed with the deep, guttural roars of an enraged bear. Through the trees, he caught glimpses of movement, a massive brown form rearing up against the sky. Breaking into a clearing, Jake saw the bear towering over a young Comanche warrior, no more than 16 or 17. The boy's leg was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle as he tried desperately to crawl away from the advancing beast. His hunting spear lay shattered nearby, useless against the bear's overwhelming strength. Time seemed to slow as Jake raised his rifle, knowing he had only seconds to act. The first shot caught the grizzly in the shoulder, spinning it away from the injured youth. The massive bear wheeled toward this new threat, blood matting its thick fur. Jake worked the lever action smoothly, putting 2 more rounds into the charging beast's chest. Still it came on, covering the ground between them with frightening speed. His horse danced sideways in terror, nearly throwing him as he squeezed off a final shot. The grizzly crashed to earth mere feet from Jake's mount, its momentum carrying it forward in a spray of leaves and soil. For several long moments, the only sound was the ragged breathing of man and horse, and the pained gasps of the injured boy. Jake dismounted carefully, keeping his rifle trained on the bear until he was certain it was dead. Only then did he turn his attention to the young warrior. The boy's face was drawn with pain but showed no fear. He spoke in halting English, introducing himself as William, son of Chief Samuel Davis of the Pennateca Comanche. Jake's eyebrows rose at the English name. He knew some tribes had begun adopting them for dealing with whites, but it was still unexpected. As he worked to splint the boy's leg with branches and strips torn from his own shirt, William explained he had been tracking the bear alone to prove his hunting prowess. Night was falling by the time Jake got William situated on his horse for the slow ride to the Comanche camp. He knew crossing into their territory uninvited was risky, but the boy's leg needed proper treatment. As they traveled, William spoke of his people's growing concerns about the railroad surveyors who had been seen near their sacred burial grounds in recent weeks. Jake listened carefully, sensing that fate had just dealt him into a game with much higher stakes than he'd imagined. The Comanche camp appeared as a collection of shadowy lodges in the gathering dusk, cook-fire smoke rising straight into the still air. Their approach was quickly spotted, and warriors emerged from between the teepees with weapons ready. William called out in Comanche, and the tension eased slightly. A tall, commanding figure stepped forward, Chief Samuel Davis himself, his face a mask of concern as he recognized his injured son. What followed was a long night of explanations and ceremony, as Jake found himself honored as a guest in the chief's lodge. Through the tribe's medicine man, William's leg was properly set, and Jake learned more about the railroad company's increasingly aggressive incursions. As dawn approached, Chief Samuel made an unprecedented offer. In exchange for Jake's help in protecting their burial grounds, he would share the location of ancient Spanish gold mines hidden in the hills to the west. Jake stared into the dying embers of the lodge fire, weighing the chief's words. The gold would secure his ranch's future for generations, but standing against the railroad companies meant making powerful enemies. Yet as he looked at William, now sleeping peacefully under thick buffalo robes, he knew he'd already made his decision. Some things were worth more than gold, like teaching his own son Thomas. Were he still alive? the meaning of honor and keeping one's word. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the lodge's smoke hole, Jake rose quietly, careful not to disturb William. Outside, the crisp morning air carried the scent of sage and wood smoke. He found Chief Samuel already mounted, along with 3 tribal scouts. The chief had insisted on showing Jake the extent of the railroad's encroachment personally, perhaps understanding that seeing was believing when it came to such matters. The small party rode east, following a winding path through stands of juniper and pinon. Jake's mare, a steady buckskin he'd bought in Fort Worth 2 seasons back, picked her way carefully across the rocky terrain. As they climbed higher into the foothills, Samuel pointed out ancient markers carved into the limestone, symbols Jake had passed 100 times without recognizing their significance. "Our ancestors sleep here," Samuel explained in careful English, gesturing to what appeared to be natural rock formations. "7 generations of my people. The Iron Horse's path would cut through the heart of these grounds." The chief's face remained stoic, but Jake caught the edge of pain in his voice. It reminded him of how he'd felt when he'd buried Sarah and Thomas, how wrong it would be if someone desecrated their final resting place. They crested a ridge, and Jake saw what the chief had brought him to witness. In the valley below, survey stakes traced a straight line through the landscape, marking the railroad's intended route. A camp of railroad men sprawled nearby, wood smoke rising from morning cook fires. Jake counted at least 20 tents. This wasn't just a survey crew, but an advance work camp preparing for construction. "James Harrison leads them," Samuel said, naming the railroad baron who'd been buying up land throughout the territory. "He offers money first, then brings threats. When those fail, accidents happen." The chief's words carried the weight of experience, and Jake remembered the mysterious fires that had plagued ranches who'd refused to sell their land around Silver City last year. Back at the Comanche camp, Jake found William awake and talking with the medicine man. The boy's eyes lit up when Jake entered the lodge, and he switched to English. "My father says you will help us. Is this true?" The hope in the young man's voice stirred something in Jake, an echo of his own son's trust before the fever had taken him and Sarah 3 winters past. "I gave my word," Jake replied, settling cross-legged by the fire. "But we'll need more than just my rifle. Harrison's got money and men behind him." He pulled out his worn map of the territory, spreading it on a tanned hide. "There's a marshal in Abilene who still believes in justice more than railroad money. Catherine Ellis. She helped me once when rustlers hit my herd." Samuel nodded slowly, studying the map. "The woman marshal, we know of her, but Abilene is far, and Harrison's men will not wait." The chief traced a line between their location and the town. 4 days' ride if you push hard. Jake calculated quickly. The railroad crew would likely begin major work within a week, once their supply wagons arrived from Tombstone. "I'll leave at first light," Jake decided. "William should stay here until his leg heals properly." The boy started to protest, but Samuel silenced him with a look. "My people will continue watching the railroad men. We have ways of slowing their work without being seen." The chief's slight smile suggested he'd done this before. That evening, as Jake prepared his gear for the long ride to Abilene, he found himself in the tribe's burial grounds. The setting sun painted the rock formations in shades of gold and crimson, and in the fading light, he could almost see what Samuel had shown him, the sacred nature of this place. He thought of his own family's small plot back at the ranch, where Sarah and Thomas lay beneath a granite marker brought all the way from back east. Emma, his ranch foreman's wife, would keep an eye on things while he was gone. She'd understood when he'd sent word about his delay, just as she'd understood 3 years ago when he'd spent weeks searching for Thomas's killer. Some debts had to be paid, some promises kept, no matter the cost. As darkness settled over the land, Jake made his peace with whatever might come. He'd lost one family. He wouldn't stand by while another lost their heritage. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged hills as Jake Johnson studied the crude map the Comanche chief had given him. The yellowed parchment, marked with faded Spanish text and mysterious symbols, seemed to pulse with untold possibilities in his weathered hands. But Jake knew the real test lay ahead, helping Standing Bear's people protect their ancestral grounds from the advancing railroad men who'd been sniffing around Silver City's outskirts like coyotes, circling a wounded deer. 3 days had passed since that fateful hunting expedition where Jake had found Young Hawk, the chief's teenage son, pinned beneath an enraged grizzly. The boy's spear lay shattered nearby, useless against the massive beast. Without hesitation, Jake had emptied his Winchester into the bear's chest, the shots echoing through the canyon like thunder. The deed had forged an unexpected bond between the lonely rancher and the proud Comanche people. William Davis, the railroad's chief surveyor, had wasted no time making his intentions clear at last night's town meeting in Silver City. His company planned to cut straight through the sacred burial grounds, claiming eminent domain and progress as justification. Jake had watched the townspeople's reactions carefully. Most seemed uncomfortable with the idea, but unwilling to oppose the railroad's influence. Only Thomas Wilson, the aging shopkeeper, had voiced any objection. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Jake's attention. Samuel Miller, his closest neighbor and friend of 20 years, rode up on his paint mare. "Them railroad boys are pushing their stakes further east," Samuel reported grimly. "Got a whole crew out there now, marking their planned route. Standing Bear's people are getting restless. Saw some of their scouts watching from the ridgeline this morning. This powder keg's about ready to blow." Jake folded the map carefully, tucking it inside his shirt. The gold could wait. He'd given his word to Standing Bear, and a promise meant something out here where a man's reputation was often all he had. Besides, he understood the Comanches' connection to their sacred land. His own wife Sarah was buried on their ranch, beneath the old oak where they'd shared so many summer evenings, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and purple. The situation grew more complex when James Thompson, Silver City's young telegraph operator, brought word that additional railroad crews were headed their way from Tombstone. More troubling were rumors that William Davis had hired gunmen to handle any interference, a thinly veiled threat that set the town buzzing with nervous energy. Jake knew time was running short to find a peaceful solution. Elizabeth Miller, Samuel's wife, had been treating young Hawk's remaining injuries from the bear attack. She reported that the Comanche were preparing for war, gathering their warriors from scattered camps. The thought of bloodshed weighed heavily on Jake. He'd seen enough death during his years as a Texas Ranger before settling in Silver City. There had to be another way to resolve this conflict. That evening, Jake rode out to the Comanche camp to meet with Standing Bear. The chief's dark eyes reflected the campfire as they discussed options. "The railroad men speak with forked tongues," the chief said solemnly. "They make promises they do not intend to keep. My father's fathers sleep in those hills. Their spirits guard our people. We cannot abandon them to the Iron Horse's path." A plan began forming in Jake's mind as he remembered the map's details. The Spanish mines supposedly contained enough gold to make even the railroad think twice about their current route. If they could prove the mine's existence and value, perhaps an alternative path could be negotiated, one that would spare the burial grounds while still allowing for progress. But first, they needed to find the mines themselves, and time was running dangerously short. Dawn found Jake and Samuel preparing for an expedition into the maze-like canyons where the mines were supposedly hidden. Young Hawk insisted on joining them, his arm still bandaged but his spirit undiminished. The boy's knowledge of the terrain would prove invaluable, and Jake admired his determination to help save his people's sacred land. They packed enough supplies for 3 days, knowing the railroad crews wouldn't wait much longer. The tension in Silver City continued to build as Mary Wilson, the shopkeeper's daughter, reported seeing armed men arriving on the afternoon stage from Fort Worth. These weren't ordinary railroad workers. Their well-oiled revolvers and hard eyes spoke of experience with violence. William Davis was clearly preparing for resistance, whether from the Comanche or their sympathizers among the townspeople. Jake knew they were racing against more than just time now. If Davis's gunmen sparked a conflict with the Comanche, the entire region could erupt into warfare. The memory of Sarah's gentle voice seemed to whisper in his ear, reminding him that some things were worth fighting for, not with bullets, but with wisdom and determination. The next few days would test everything he believed about justice, loyalty, and the true meaning of progress. As dawn broke over the distant mesas, Jake and Samuel rode westward along a dry creek bed, following ancient trails the Comanche had used for generations. The morning air carried the scent of sage and dust, while overhead, hawks circled lazily against the pale blue sky. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that every hour lost brought Davis's men closer to destroying something irreplaceable. Samuel spoke softly of the burial grounds ahead, describing the generations of his people who rested beneath the twisted juniper trees and wind-carved stones. His words painted a picture of sacred ceremonies performed under star-filled skies, of wisdom passed down through countless summers. The young warrior's usual stoic demeanor softened when he shared these stories, revealing the deep connection between his people and this harsh but beautiful land. They discovered fresh wagon tracks cutting across the trail near noon, the deep ruts evidence of heavy surveying equipment being transported. Jake dismounted to examine them more closely, noting they couldn't be more than a day old. Samuel's expression darkened as he pointed to cigarette butts and discarded tin cans. Davis's men were getting closer to the sacred sites than anyone had realized. In a narrow canyon, they encountered Thomas, an elderly prospector Jake had known for years. The grizzled man warned them that he'd seen at least 15 armed men making camp near Eagle Rock, less than 5 miles from the burial grounds. Thomas had overheard them discussing plans to begin surveying at first light, with orders to handle any interference quickly and quietly. Jake sent Samuel ahead to warn his people while he rode into Silver City, hoping to rally support among the townspeople who'd grown increasingly uneasy about Davis's heavy-handed methods. He found Mary Wilson organizing a group of concerned citizens at her father's store, including several ranchers who'd seen their own lands threatened by the railroad's expanding influence. The meeting in the store's back room revealed the town's growing divisions. Elizabeth, the schoolteacher, spoke passionately about broken treaties and moral obligations, while James, the livery stable owner, worried about losing business if they opposed the railroad. Jake listened carefully, then shared what he'd seen of Davis's armed men and their preparations for violence. As evening approached, Catherine, the telegraph operator, burst into the store with urgent news. She'd intercepted a message to Davis requesting additional men from Fort Worth, along with concerning references to permanent solutions to the Indian problem. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Davis wasn't just planning to survey the land, he was preparing for something far more sinister. Jake spent the night making preparations, gathering supplies and sending messages to trusted allies in neighboring ranches. Emma, the widow who ran the boarding house, provided extra ammunition and medical supplies, her lined face reflecting memories of past conflicts between settlers and natives. She'd seen too many good people die over greed and misunderstanding. By midnight, Jake had assembled a small but determined group willing to stand with the Comanche. They would ride out before dawn, hoping to position themselves between Davis's men and the burial grounds. Jake knew they were vastly outnumbered, but sometimes the mere presence of witnesses could prevent the worst atrocities. As he checked his rifle one last time, Sarah's wedding ring hung heavy on the chain around his neck, reminding him that courage wasn't about winning fights. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the odds. The stars wheeled overhead as Jake made his final preparations, their ancient light falling equally on sacred graves and railroad surveys, on men of peace and merchants of violence. Tomorrow would test not just their resolve, but the very soul of the frontier itself. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the empty spaces, their voices echoing like spirits through the darkness. The pre-dawn air bit cold as Jake and his small band of allies crested the ridge overlooking the ancient burial grounds. Among them rode William, a former cavalry scout who'd lost his taste for government work after witnessing too many broken treaties, and Thomas, a quiet blacksmith whose Cherokee grandmother had taught him to respect the old ways. The burial ground's weathered stone markers stood like silent sentinels in the purple darkness, their shadows stretching long across the sacred earth. Jake positioned his men carefully, using the natural contours of the land to make their small force appear larger than it was. He'd learned such tactics during the war, though he never thought he'd be using them to protect native graves from his own countrymen. The irony wasn't lost on him as he recalled his father's words about how civilization often advanced on the backs of its worst impulses. Through his spyglass, Jake caught the first glimpse of Davis's surveying party approaching from the east. Jake Thompson crouched behind a fallen oak, his weathered hands gripping his Winchester rifle as he watched the railroad surveyors methodically stake their claim through the sacred Comanche burial grounds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley, where ancient stone markers stood as silent sentinels over generations of warrior graves. His newfound ally, Chief William, had trusted him with the defense of this hallowed ground, and Jake couldn't help but remember the fierce bear attack that had brought them together just weeks ago. The sound of approaching horses drew Jake's attention to the eastern ridge, where Samuel Davis, the railroad company's lead engineer, rode alongside a dozen armed men. Jake had known Samuel years ago in Abilene, before the rails started pushing west, before greed had transformed his old friend into someone unrecognizable. The memory of their shared past made what was about to happen even more difficult. Through his scope, Jake spotted Thomas, the chief's son he'd saved from the grizzly, moving silently through the brush with several young warriors. The boy had healed well, though the scars on his shoulder would always remind them both of that fateful day. The Comanche warriors had painted their faces with sacred symbols, prepared to defend their ancestors' resting place with their lives if necessary. A cold wind swept through the valley as Jake reflected on the hidden Spanish gold mines marked on the map Chief William had given him. The yellowed parchment now seemed to burn in his vest pocket, but Jake knew the true treasure wasn't gold. It was preserving something sacred, something that mattered more than all the railroad money in the world. His own wife Sarah's grave lay back on his ranch near Silver City, and he understood the power of hallowed ground. The surveyors began hammering stakes into the earth, each metal spike driving into ancient soil like a dagger. Jake watched as Samuel dismounted, consulting his maps with casual disregard for the stone markers all around him. The chief's son had told Jake of the vision quest that had led him to the bear, of how saving his life had been foretold by tribal elders. Now Jake understood why fate had brought him here. Thunder rolled in the distance as clouds gathered above the burial grounds. Jake thought of his daughter Mary back home, and how she'd begged him not to get involved in this fight. But he'd seen too much injustice in his years on the frontier to stand idle now. The railroad men had already destroyed 3 other sacred sites, leaving nothing but iron rails and broken promises in their wake. Chief William appeared beside Jake like a shadow, his face painted with the same symbols as his warriors. "The spirits of our ancestors walk with us today," he whispered, gripping Jake's shoulder. "You have become brother to my people, Jake Thompson. Whatever comes, know that you fight with honor." The chief's words carried the weight of generations, and Jake felt their truth in his bones. The tension broke when one of Samuel's men spotted movement in the brush. Shots rang out, echoing across the valley as the Comanche warriors revealed themselves, arrows already flying. Jake took aim at the surveyors' horses, sending them into panic. The chief's strategy was clear: create chaos without bloodshed if possible, force them to retreat without martyrs for either side. Samuel's voice carried over the gunfire, ordering his men to hold their ground. But Jake could see fear in their eyes. This was sacred land, and even the most hardened railroad man could feel the power of this place. Thomas led a charge from the eastern flank, his war cry piercing the air as mounted warriors emerged from hidden positions all around the valley. The battle moved like a dance, with Jake and the Comanche warriors herding the surveyors away from the burial grounds. Samuel's men fired wildly, but the warriors seemed to fade into the landscape like spirits, appearing and disappearing at will. Jake's shots found their marks with precision, disabling equipment and forcing the railroad men to scramble for cover. As the fighting intensified, Jake spotted Samuel making a break for higher ground, clutching something in his hand. Following his instinct, Jake pursued his former friend, knowing whatever Samuel carried could change the course of this conflict. The chase led them through ancient stone formations, past graves marked with faded tribal symbols that seemed to watch their every move. The confrontation came at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley. Samuel held up a government order, his hands shaking. "This land belongs to the railroad now, Jake. Nothing you or these savages do can change that." But Jake saw the doubt in Samuel's eyes, the same doubt he'd felt before choosing to stand with the Comanche. Sometimes, a man had to decide what kind of legacy he wanted to leave. Thunder cracked overhead as rain began to fall, turning the dusty ground to mud. Jake kept his rifle trained on Samuel but spoke softly, like he was talking to a spooked horse. "Look around you, Samuel. Every stone here marks a warrior, a father, a son. Would you build your railroad over your own father's grave?" The words seemed to reach something in Samuel's heart, and Jake watched his old friend's resolve begin to crumble. The sound of hoofbeats announced Chief William's arrival, with Thomas and other warriors close behind. They formed a circle around Jake and Samuel, but held their weapons low. The chief dismounted and approached Samuel, his presence commanding respect even from those who moments ago had been his enemies. "Your iron horse can find another path," William said, This ground has known too much blood already. Rain soaked them all as Samuel looked from Jake to the chief, then down at the government order in his hands. The paper was dissolving in the downpour, the ink running like tears down the page. Jake watched his friend's transformation, saw the moment when Samuel Davis chose to become something more than just another railroad man pushing west. The order fell from his fingers, carried away by the wind. The valley grew quiet as Samuel ordered his surviving men to withdraw. Jake stood with Chief William and Thomas, watching the railroad crew gather their scattered equipment and wounded pride. The rain continued to fall, washing away the day's violence, cleansing the sacred ground that had endured yet another test of time. The ancestors' spirits, Jake thought, must be smiling. As the railroad crew disappeared into the misty distance, Jake felt the weight of generations settling upon his shoulders. The sacred burial grounds had been defended, but he knew this victory was merely the beginning. Chief William's weathered hand gripped his shoulder, and the old warrior's eyes held both gratitude and concern. "The iron horse will seek other paths," William said softly. "But greed has many faces." Thunder rolled across the valley as Thomas, William's son, began gathering the tribe's warriors. The young man who Jake had saved from the grizzly months ago now moved with the assured confidence of a future leader. The bond between them had grown stronger than blood, transcending the divisions that had long separated their peoples. Jake pulled the worn Spanish map from his saddlebag, its ancient parchment protected by oiled leather. The gold mines marked upon it could change everything, or destroy it all. William had given him this trust not just as payment for saving Thomas, but as a test of character. The chief's words echoed in his memory. "Gold fever has killed more men than any war." The storm's intensity grew as the three men took shelter in a nearby cave, its walls adorned with ancient pictographs that told stories of battles and hunts from centuries past. Thomas built a small fire while his father traced the fading lines on the map with a calloused finger. The Spanish called it La Boca del Diablo, the devil's mouth, William explained. They sealed it after the Great Plague, leaving their riches to the earth. Jake thought of his late wife Sarah's words about legacy. She had always said wealth wasn't measured in gold, but in the stories we leave behind. The railroad's threat had awakened something in him, a desire to protect not just the land, but the history it held. His ranch near Silver City could wait. This was about something larger than himself. Dawn broke over the valley as they formulated their plan. The mine's location lay 3 days' ride south, in a maze of canyons that had swallowed many ambitious men. William spoke of dark legends surrounding the place, of Spanish ghosts who guarded their ill-gotten treasures. But Jake saw beyond the superstition to the truth. The real value wasn't in Spanish gold, but in protecting these lands from the ever-advancing march of steel and steam. Thomas had gathered intelligence from traders in Abilene about other railroad surveys being planned. The companies were like circling vultures, searching for any passage through the tribal lands. The gold from the mines could buy legal protection, establish treaties that even the most corrupt officials couldn't ignore. It was a dangerous gamble, but one that might save not just the burial grounds, but all the sacred spaces threatened by progress. Jake sent a trusted messenger to Fort Worth with letters for both Samuel and his ranch foreman. If they didn't return in 2 weeks, Samuel would know where to look, and more importantly, would understand why they had gone. The railroad man's change of heart had shown Jake that conscience could still triumph over commerce. As they prepared their horses for the journey south, William performed a blessing ceremony. The old chief's chants merged with the wind, carrying prayers to ancestors who had walked these lands since time immemorial. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling deeper into his bones. This wasn't just about gold or graves or railroad lines anymore. It was about preserving something precious before it vanished forever. They rode out as the storm cleared, 3 men from different worlds united by a common purpose. Behind them, the burial grounds stood peaceful once more, ancient stones standing sentinel over generations of warriors. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and perhaps redemption. Jake took one last look at the valley where it had all begun, knowing that whatever they found in those Spanish mines would change everything, for better or worse. The trail south would test them all, but Jake had learned that the strongest bonds were forged in adversity. As they disappeared into the landscape, the morning sun painted the clouds gold. A promise, perhaps, or a warning. Either way, there was no turning back now. The story of the widow rancher, the war chief, and the Spanish gold was just beginning, and like all true tales of the border territories, it would be written in both blood and honor. The sun hung low on the horizon as Jake Johnson and Chief Flying Arrow's warriors surrounded the railroad surveyor's camp near Silver City. The past weeks of careful planning had led to this moment. Jake's heart pounded as he thought of the sacred Comanche burial grounds just beyond the ridge, and of young Thomas Flying Arrow, the chief's son whose life he'd saved from that grizzly. The debt between them had grown into something far deeper than gold. William Davis, the lead surveyor, emerged from his tent with hands raised. His weathered face showed a mix of resignation and anger as he faced the assembled force. "You're making a mistake, Johnson. The railroad's coming through here whether you like it or not. We've got the territory's backing." His voice carried across the evening air, but Jake detected uncertainty in his tone. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Thomas and the warriors, Jake felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about some Spanish gold mines anymore. It was about preserving something sacred, something that transcended the greed of men. The memory of his late wife Sarah, who'd taught him to see beyond mere profit, seemed to whisper wisdom in his ear. "The territory may back you, Davis, but they don't know what we know," Jake called out. "Those burial grounds hold generations of Comanche ancestors. You'll have to find another route." As he spoke, Thomas translated for the warriors, their faces stern with determination. The surveyor's men shifted nervously, clearly outnumbered and far from any help. Chief Flying Arrow stepped forward, his presence commanding respect even from Davis's men. Through Thomas's translation, he spoke of the ancient pact between his people and the land, of the spirits that guarded their ancestors' bones. The chief's words carried such power that even the most hardened of the surveyors lowered their eyes. Mary Wilson, the local schoolteacher who'd helped Jake understand Comanche customs, had ridden out to witness the confrontation. She now produced documents proving the burial ground's historical significance. "The territorial governor himself signed these papers last month," she announced. "This land is protected by law." The tension broke like a summer storm. Davis studied the papers, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Why didn't you just show these before?" he demanded. Jake explained how they'd needed time to gather proof, to document the sites, to secure the governor's protection. The weeks of preparation had paid off better than any gold could have. As the surveyors packed up camp, Thomas approached Jake with a leather pouch. Inside lay the map to the Spanish mines, but Jake handed it back. "Keep it," he said softly. "Some treasures are worth more than gold." Thomas smiled, understanding passing between them like a current of clear water. The chief nodded approvingly, pride evident in his bearing. Later that evening, as celebrations began in the Comanche camp, Jake sat with Mary by the fire. She spoke of how his actions had helped bridge two worlds, how the railroad would now skirt the sacred lands, preserving both progress and tradition. The firelight danced in her eyes as she described her dreams of teaching both settler and Comanche children. The night deepened, filled with songs of victory and tales of ancestors. Jake thought of how his journey had begun with saving one life and ended up saving something far greater. The Spanish gold would remain hidden in the hills, but he had found riches of a different kind. Friendship, respect, and perhaps even love, as Mary's hand found his in the firelight. Chief Flying Arrow named Jake an honorary member of the tribe that night, giving him the name Guardian of Sacred Ground. The ceremony moved him deeply, reminding him of all he'd learned about honor and duty since that fateful day with the bear. The chief spoke of how some men seek gold in the earth, while others find it in their hearts. As dawn approached, Jake and Mary rode back towards Silver City, their horses walking side by side. The first rays of sun painted the burial grounds in soft gold, and Jake saw the land through new eyes. He had come to these territories seeking fortune, but had found something far more precious, a family of both settlers and Comanche, united in protecting something greater than themselves. The story of how a widowed rancher and a Comanche war chief's son saved the sacred grounds became legend in Silver City. Years later, children of both peoples would gather to hear Mary tell the tale, while Jake and Thomas sat nearby, their friendship a living testament to the power of understanding between cultures. The Spanish gold remained a mystery, but the real treasure had been found in the hearts of those who chose to stand together. The years that followed brought both change and continuity to the borderlands. Jake expanded his ranch, but rather than focusing solely on cattle, he dedicated portions of his land as a buffer zone between the growing railroad interests and the Comanche burial grounds. With Mary's help, he established a school where children from both communities learned each other's languages and traditions, turning the old bunkhouse into a place of learning rather than loneliness. Thomas, the chief's son, became a respected bridge between two worlds. He moved freely between his father's people and Silver City, where he helped Jake manage the growing herd and taught the younger generation traditional hunting methods. The bear scars on both men's bodies became badges of honor, silent reminders of the day their worlds had intersected in ways neither could have imagined. The railroad companies didn't give up easily. James Morton, a ruthless surveyor from Fort Worth, arrived with armed men and legal documents claiming eminent domain. But Jake had prepared for this, having spent months working with sympathetic lawyers in Abilene who specialized in territorial rights. The battle moved from the dusty plains to wooden-floored courtrooms, where Jake's testimony about the sacred nature of the grounds swayed even the most hardened judges. Catherine, a young Comanche woman who had studied at Jake's school, proved instrumental in documenting the burial ground's historical significance. Her detailed maps and writings, combining traditional knowledge with Western documentation methods, created an unassailable case for preservation. The railroad was forced to reroute their tracks 20 miles south near Tombstone, where the terrain proved more favorable anyway. As Silver City grew, Jake noticed how the once sharp boundaries between settler and Comanche lands began to blur in positive ways. Markets sprang up where both peoples traded goods and stories. Mary's healing practice incorporated both Western medicine and traditional Comanche remedies, drawing patients from as far as Fort Worth who sought her unique approach to treating ailments. The Spanish gold mines remained unmapped, but their legend evolved into something different. Local children would often hear Jake tell them that the real gold lay in the friendship between peoples, in the trust built through keeping one's word, and in the courage to stand up for what was right. The chief would smile knowingly during these stories, understanding that Jake had learned the map's true purpose, not to lead to material wealth, but to guide him toward a greater treasure. Elizabeth, Jake's late wife, would have been proud of the legacy their ranch had created. Her memory lived on in the gardens Mary planted, where traditional Comanche medicinal herbs grew alongside Elizabeth's beloved roses. The blending of cultures she had always dreamed of had come to pass, though not in the way anyone could have predicted. During the harvest festivals, which now combined traditional Comanche ceremonies with settler celebrations, Jake would sometimes stand at the edge of the burial grounds at sunset. The weathered crosses of the settler cemetery stood not far from the Comanche burial mounds, a testament to how death unified all peoples. Here, Thomas would join him, both men silent in their contemplation of how a bear attack had set in motion events that transformed an entire territory. The story reached beyond the borderlands, attracting peaceful settlers who sought to be part of this unique community. Emma, a schoolteacher from Abilene, arrived to help Mary expand the school, bringing new ideas while respecting the established balance between traditions. The children she taught grew up seeing no contradiction in embracing both worlds, carrying forward the legacy Jake and Thomas had built. As Jake aged, his ranch became more than just a place for raising cattle. It transformed into a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over conflict. The Spanish gold mines, if they existed, remained hidden in the mountains, but their promise had led to something far more valuable: a community where the children of former enemies played together under the vast Texas sky. Their laughter a melody sweeter than any golden treasure could provide. Years passed, and Jake found himself sitting on his porch more often, watching the changing landscape with a mixture of pride and contemplation. The railroad had eventually come, but not through the sacred burial grounds. Instead, it curved respectfully around the protected territory, a testament to the unusual alliance forged between settlers and the Comanche people. The compromise had cost Jake some of his best grazing land, but the sacrifice had earned something far more precious: lasting peace. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas's grandson, a young man who carried his grandfather's name and wisdom, rode up to Jake's ranch. He brought news that the tribal elders had made an unprecedented decision. They would share select portions of their medicinal knowledge with Mary's growing clinic, which now served both settlers and tribal members. The integration of traditional healing with Western medicine became yet another bridge between the communities. Emma's school had grown into a proper academy, where children learned not only reading and arithmetic, but also the history of both peoples.